Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. This is I believe it's our second or third SWIAA in a series of webinars that we've been doing. And this is these webinars are hosted by Rural Development and Apex Applied Technology, University of Arizona, and of course SWIAA is the main individuals or organization working on this. So really appreciate your time today. The way we're going to get started on this is there'll be an introduction from Allegra about some of the programs coming up. And then we will jump into the program. MC it. First would be up is Gilbert Tutu, who's a natural resource specialist with the Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS, out at the sales office on the TO. And then we had on the schedule is Izetta Morris from the Pashyaki Tribal Charitable Found Organization. She's the director there. She may be a little delayed, so we're going to then push up and we're going to have Alexandra Carlisle, who's a tribal extension agent of the University of Arizona, and she's located in Shiprock, Arizona. And then in the end, kind of closing out, is going to be Dr. Ed Franklin, University of Arizona professor in the Department of Agricultural Education. And he's going to be doing some presentations on drones and drone usage in agriculture, and a lot of interesting videos and how you might think about using these in your organizations. So, and I forgot to say, Isaiah is going to be talking about organizational structures in agricultural associations, like, you know, nonprofits, cooperatives, that kind of stuff. And Gilbert's going to be talking about the business and technical assistance announcer or Eqip program and options for the Southwest farmers and ranchers. And look, kind of a preview of some of the work that he's doing out there. He's doing a lot of tremendous work out on the TO. So it'll be really good to see some of those slides too. Okay, so we're going to jump to the announcement right now. I'm going to share the screen.
Thank you, Trent. So yeah, this webinar is being made possible by a grant that we have with the Southwest Indian Agricultural Association and USDA Rural Development with the University of Arizona and Apex Applied Technology as partners. I work with Apex Applied Technology, and we are a consulting firm that is really motivated to help small business owners that are businesses owned or operated by tribal members. And we're motivated to help these businesses either expand or get started. And so through this grant, we're able to offer some specific kinds of business assistance to new or emerging businesses or established businesses. And this is all able to be provided free of charge. And so we're making this announcement to try to spread the word about these offerings. And so please pass this information along to people in your networks if you think of anyone that could be interested. We're able to provide information and help on how to start a business, from, you know, more legal questions and incorporation, connecting you with lawyers, stuff like that, strategic planning needs, business bookkeeping, managing and minimizing business risk, and developing feasibility studies or business plans. We also can provide help with business registration, obtaining tax ID numbers, obtaining federal DUNS or SAM registrations that you would use to apply for grants, and then also doing some annual business reporting. So there's a lot of different ways that we can help, and if you're interested, you can get in touch with us at our website, which is aatechsolar.com, or you can email me directly, and my email is at the bottom of the flyer there. It's allegra.mount@aatechsolar.com. And thank you very much, Trent. That's all I needed to say.
Allegra, would you mind putting your email into the chat box too? That way, if folks want to grab it, they can go ahead and grab it. All right, thank you. So a little bit more about what we're going to be doing. This is being recorded, so we will have that available, then it will be posted. if we could, because we have a lot of great information to go over today, so we might hold off the questions, put them in the chat if you want to put some questions in the chat if you have that capability. Otherwise, we could wait till the end of each of the presentations and ask a few questions and then be able to go on. Okay, so I'm going to start right now. We're going to jump into, where did he go? Gilbert's talk. I had it open here too. Okay. I will get it back here in just a minute. Technical difficulty, had it open. Okay, here we go. Okay, Gilbert.
Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Gilbert Tutu, and I'm a natural resource specialist with the Natural Resource Conservation Service. And our work area is the Tohono Nation, where our office is located in Sells, Arizona. I'd like to say thank you for this opportunity from the Southwest Indian Association, and let's get started. Next slide.
Did it go for you?
Okay. Yes, that was a little delay, but I think it's fine.
Okay.
Now, what I'd like to cover this morning are conservation activity plans, and these are all Farm Bill updates, watershed protection program, source water protection, and 3 items under the Environmental Quality Incentive Program: irrigation history, historically underserved participants, and the 2018 Farm Bill expanded eligibility. So those are the subjects I'll be covering this morning, at least on updates. I know there's a lot more programs and initiatives under the Farm Bill, but with time, I just picked these on your screen this morning. All right, next slide. I'd like to start with the first initiative, which is the Conservation Activity Plan, the CAPS. Now, this has been around for a while, but I just wanted to reintroduce it to the tribal producers because it's just one of the ways of getting started in the Eqip program. Now, a conservation activity plan can be developed for producers to identify conservation practice needs to address specific natural resource concerns on the land, such on rangeland, such as range, crop, and forest. Now, CAP plans, they cover resource needs such as soil health, conservation planning assessment, natural nutrient management, crop rotation, and energy and precision farming. Now, these plans also cover rangeland, inadequate livestock water, inadequate feed and forage, so everything on range and forest as far as resource needs, these plans can cover. With the CAP plan, producers can apply for financial assistance to implement the recommended conservation practice in these CAP plans. And again, this is just one way of getting started. Next slide. Here are the program. First is NRCS personnel are prohibited from developing the CAP plan. So the producers need to contact a technical service provider, and we'll get into that in the next slide. But CAP plans, NRCS personnel can't provide assistance with them, but they can only provide assistance developing of the conservation plans to address the resource concerns in these plans. Now, a producer may not start any financial activity or engage in services with the TSP prior to these contracts being obligated by NRCS. Now, it's a contract, so the program will be paying the technical service provider to develop the CAP plan on the conservation planning area. Okay, if the producer may inquire with the TSP to determine if any travel is needed. Now, if you go to the TSP database for Arizona, you know, there isn't a whole lot of Arizona-based TSPs, so that's why we threw that statement in there. Under the initiative, it doesn't cover travel or per diem, and only the conservation planning portion of it. So I just kind of threw that in. So that's been a problem. So, you know, for the tribes and producers that that know of anybody qualified to apply as TSPs, you know, we really need them in Arizona. Next slide, please. A little bit on the TSPs. Where do you find the TSP? Well, the TechReg is an NRCS internet-based registry for technical service providers. And who can become TSPs? Ag producers, individuals, private businesses, American Indian tribes, nonprofit organizations, and public agencies. You know, they can all register and apply to become TSPs on this website. Who's the website used by? Again, these are agricultural producers, private forests, landowners. You know, they can use and obtain TSPs through this website. Now, TSPs are certified to work with NRCS to help agriculture producers plan, design, and check out conservation practices on the land. Okay, next slide. This is a watershed and flood protection program that's been around for many years, and it just recently got funding. Actually, last year and this year, it received funding from Congress. So there's been a lot of interest in it, and I want to kind of highlight a project that we're doing here on the nation with this program. So a little background on the program. The authority provided under the Public Law 83-56 is used to supplement both our present agricultural, soil, and water conservation programs, NRCS, and WFPO programs, the Watershed program for development and flooding protection of major watersheds. Now, this acts like a bridge to bridge the gap between, and it greatly enhances the ultimate benefit of both. And so we're in the process of figuring this out, and right away we can see some of the benefits, you know, of using both of these programs, and the benefits for the stakeholders also. Now the photograph you see below the text there, that's a tour we did about a week ago on the Santa Vera district, and this is where the project is located. And at the end of the watershed, as it goes back into the Santa Cruz River, it goes through about 1.8 miles of floodway, and this floodway is really full of sediment right now. You can see the farm is just barely starting to remove all that sediment. And the thing is that these floodways are already designed for a 100-year flood event. So sedimentation is definitely one of the resource concerns in this project. Next slide. Here are some of the purposes. The map shows the watershed within the district. I listed 8 purposes of the program: erosion and sediment control, watershed protection, flood protection, water quality improvements, rural, municipal, and industrial water source, supplies, water management, fish and wildlife enhancement, and hydropower sources. Next slide. I'd like to highlight this project in the next couple of slides so you can see what the program addresses in this specific watershed. For many years, flooding has been a concern with the residential area within the district along the portions of the Cemetery Wash. This endangers homes, it threatens public safety, it severely limits access to residents during these flooding events. Now, during heavy rains, a large portion of the Centerville community is cut off, such as fire, police, personnel, equipment, medical services, affecting approximately 250 residents. Next slide. Currently, there's no alternative route for emergency vehicles to access the residents. So in effect, in the affected areas along the watershed, and there is a need for action to address this issue. The actions included in the plan tentatively are constructing culverts designed to carry 100-year flood storm events to allow emergency vehicles to pass during large storm events, flood protection dikes to direct peak flows, and a portion of the Centerville Mission Road will be moved and basically rerouted. The purpose of the project is for preventing damages and erosion, floodwater, and sedimentation. Okay, next slide. Okay, we got a picture here, a map of the flood protection, and you can see them in the blue dots. Actually, the nation here has one on the Centerville district, which is a satellite district south of Tucson, and then there are two other watershed projects which affect the nation because they go through the nation. That's the Brawley Wash and the East Santa Cruz project. So there's a lot of watershed projects going around the nation itself here. So, but this kind of gives you an idea of how many projects are in Arizona. Next slide. Okay, the next initiative, this is a new one. It's called the Source Water Protection. This initiative provides source water protection through targeting of agricultural practices. You know, it encourages the protection of drinking water sources through the following methods. Identify local priority area for drinking water protection in each state in collaboration with the state technical committees and community water systems. It provides increased incentive payments for practices that are related to soil quality, water quality and quantity, and protect drinking water sources while also benefiting producers. So practices can receive increased payment rates up to 90% of the cost of the practices. Next slide. While we're waiting for that slide to come up, you know, this collaboration has already been done in Arizona. I'm going to bring up a map to show you what the the actual source water protection areas are in a minute here. While the slide's coming up, locally here on the nation, we did not have, there was no identified conservation practices which affect any of the domestic water systems that we had here. So we don't have any on the nation currently right now.
So, or did you get the next slide, Gilbert, or?
Yes, please.
Okay. Looks like it froze or something.
Well, I can go ahead and continue and hopefully, oh, there it is. Okay. Are the source water protection areas, and these, okay, now here are some of the priority. Again, this is a national priority, and it's required participation by the states, additional ranking points, potential higher payment rates for selected practices. 90% historically underserved and historically underserved participants, depending on the resource concerns. Now, go ahead and do the next slide. See if it comes up. Okay, these are some of the practices. Now, these aren't the entire practices, but these are just some of the main ones that I picked up. Conservation crop rotation, cover crop, residue and tillage management, filter stripping, irrigation system micro irrigation, irrigation water management, and nutrient management. Now, even if you're not enrolled in the SWP program, but your treatment area falls into one of these boundaries, the green boundaries you saw on the map, our software, our ranking software will automatically detect this, and then so you could actually receive additional ranking points and potentially higher payment rates if your plan or your plan boundaries fall into these areas. Next slide. Now here are some of the resource concerns. Again, this is not a complete list, but just highlighting some of them. Okay, surface water depletion, groundwater depletion, inefficient irrigation water use, nutrient water transport to surface and groundwater, pesticide transport to surface and groundwater, pathogens and chemical manure, biosolids or compost transportation to groundwater, salts transported to surface and groundwater, petroleum, heavy metals, and other pollutants transported to surface water. Okay, next slide. This is the last program I'm going to cover this morning. It's the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, Eqip. Now, the Eqip program provides financial and technical assistance to agricultural producers to address natural resource concerns. Again, this is on crop, range, and forest land. Some of the environmental benefits: improve water and air quality, conserve ground and surface water, increase soil health, reduce soil erosion, sedimentation, improve or create wildlife habitat, and mitigate against increased weather volatility. Next slide. Okay, this update covers historically underserved participants. Historically underserved participants are eligible for advanced payments to help offset costs related to purchasing materials or contracting through Eqip. HU participants may elect to receive an advance of not less than 50% of the Eqip conservation practice payment amount. Now, this is the update. Now, if the participant elects to receive the advance payment, the funds must be expended within 90 days of receiving the advancement. Now, in previous farm bills, there was a 90-day time frame that was attached to this incentive. So that has been gone. So right now, you just have to show that 90 days, or at least in 90 days, that you've used at least the majority of the advance payment, and then just go ahead and install your practices. Now, here on the nation, you know, this is really going to be helpful because we have some, you know, 10-mile fence projects that there's no way it could get done in 90 days, and ranchers had to do at least half out of pocket before they could even start the advancement. So this is going to help. Normally, these conservation practices are scheduled. Normally, it's scheduled for a year, so you have a year to complete it, and that's going to really help a lot of producers, I think, with larger projects. Next slide. Okay, this next slide has to do with eligibility. The 2018 Farm Bill expanded eligibility regarding with whom the NRCS can enter into an Eqip contract. Now, NRCS may enter Eqip contracts with water management entities where they support a water conservation or irrigation efficiency project. So basically, the irrigation districts are eligible now. You know, these entities are defined as state irrigation districts, groundwater management districts, or similar entities. So that's something new with the 2018 Farm Bill. Next slide. Now here is the irrigation history requirement for the Eqip program. First, no usage of previous irrigation history forms by NRCS. So you remember we had, we had our forms that documented the years, the crop, and acres to show irrigation histories. So with this new Farm Bill, we're not using those forms. So basically, land offered for enrollment in Eqip must have an irrigation history for at least 2 out of the last 5 years to qualify for irrigation-related practices and activities that improve water conservation. Now, the way we document that irrigation history now is just a tech note in the plan based off a site visit. You know, if planner has any doubts, he can look at previous year's aerial imagery, farm service agency production records, etc. But the burden of proof falls on the participant to provide significant evidence of history if requested. Now, on all of our programs, there's always been a 5% spot check for quality assurance, and they will randomly pick, based on what the application is, and they'll pick, like for instance, if you said you were historically underserved, they will ask you for evidence to prove that. So that's where this burden of proof falls with the irrigation history. Next slide. Now there's a drought exception in the plan, and applicants who have been affected by prolonged drought may meet the irrigation requirements without requesting a waiver if the following requirements are met. The first one, if the land is still still must meet the 2 out of the 5-year criteria, but it is based on the years preceding the start of the drought. Now, the drought is determined by the U.S. Drought Monitor classification D2, severe drought or higher. Now, NRCS certifies that the current irrigation system is in working condition aside the lack of water resulting from the drought. NRCS can show that the irrigation system is in working condition, and that the improvements will gain in irrigation efficiency once the drought is ended. Okay, next slide. This last slide on irrigation history is a request for a waiver. Applicants who are Indian tribes, who are self-certified as limited resource or socially disadvantaged farmers or ranchers may request in writing a waiver of irrigation history requirement to our state conservationists. The chief or designee may approve the waiver if the requirements are met as outlined in Exhibit 53420C, Irrigation History Waiver Worksheet. Now that concludes the update to the conservation practices. Now, what I've put here is just some conservation, some slides of the conservation practices that address the priority resource concerns. Now, you know, these resource concerns may differ from tribe to tribe, conservation district to conservation district, but the top ones in Arizona have always been water. So we're going to start with that. So here are some of the things that we are doing to address the inadequate lack of livestock water here on the Tohono O'odham Nation. In the slides, you can see livestock ponds. So basically, these are 15-foot deep structures, and they hold approximately 4.3 acre-feet, which is about 1 million gallons. Again, these are all the water sources, the watershed. So these are, you know, if it doesn't rain, these just kind of become seasonal water facilities. Next slide. These are sediment basins, and these basically go along with the livestock ponds and other areas that have sediment problems. But basically, these sediment basins can be designed to be to capture at least 3 or 4 years of sediment, and they need to be maintained and cleaned out, and that can vary depending on the watershed size. So normally we try to shoot for at least 5 years before these are filled and need that operation and maintenance to them. And basically they come with a pipe or without pipe. But in the small slide there, you can see the amount of sediment that comes out of these rangelands, especially if they're coming out of droughts. And again, they're just to improve the water quality going into the reservoirs of our ponds, or just releasing the water a lot slower on just average rangeland. Next. Next slide. Wells. A conservation practice for wells. And so here's just one of the examples of a well. And this is an old method. When we saw this, the rancher, it looked like we were back in the 50s or something. This is an old method, but based on the newer methods. But wells are under our Eqip program in our cost list, and they are a conservation practice. Next slide. Now, woody encroachment has always been a problem, especially on our year-round grazed areas. And mainly this encroachment happens in our most productive areas, which is our bottoms here. So basically, we do a lot of brush management, mechanically brush management. We haven't done any chemicals brush management or either any kind of biological brush management yet. So basically, what we try to do is we use the site guides and try to put the composition of the mesquite in this case back to what the historical levels were. And then again, this is a consultation between the producer and the planner. And then they're always followed up with range seeding and then also with deferment. So they're not a standalone practice. So so hopefully and this deferment is basically resting these brushed areas for the growing season of the perennial bunch grasses that are replanted. And the perennial bunch grasses are missing from these sites completely. So mainly our seed mix is just nothing but perennial grasses, bunch grasses. So again, we can put that in a contract for 3 summers. Next slide. Okay, this is another land practice called grazing land mechanical treatment that are compacted areas that are basically capped and have no vegetation on it. And we're just trying to, right now, currently a lot of annuals come out on these sites. So we're just trying to increase the diversity of plants using these methods. Basically, a lot of our low desert, 7 to 10 inch areas where we have large clay bottoms where the water goes through these areas. And so a lot of these are annuals, will only produce annuals just because of the rainfall. So we just try to reintroduce a lot of the annuals that are missing there. And this will only provide the ranchers, forage in the good springs and good winter rains. So when those aren't available, then we have to, that we'll just probably recommend nutrient blocks in these areas when they use these pastures. Next slide. Here's a practice that we use pretty frequently. It's called water spreading or diversions. These structures basically, we use the diversions to redirect water away from really large eroded sites. And basically we're talking maybe 6-8 foot erosion sites that really we can't really do anything with, cost effectively anyway. And so we're just diverting in these waters right now to these areas, to different areas around these sites. Our water spreading, though, what we try to do with that is that we try to, these water spreaders are put on a level contour where the water hits it. It doesn't move right or either way. It just backs up, then goes around. And we try to seed about 1 acre behind it. And basically this acts as the seed source. The water will move to seed, the air, the wind, the wildlife will move to seed throughout the pasture. Our goal is to, when that water hits these watersheds, hits these water spreaders, that the vegetation will use the water, release it at a slower velocity, catch it again. And hopefully the goal is not to let any of the water leave the planting area. Next slide. Range seeding. Now, after every brushing, water development, like the spreaders or diversions, we try to go in there and seed these areas. A lot of our seeding is done by broadcasting. We don't have at least the mechanical seeders, the tires really don't last through a project. we find out. So, and we haven't done aerial planning yet. So a lot of it is just broadcast. And so you can just see just the slides, basically what's in the seed mix, planting depth is no greater than 1 inch to 1/8, you know, for these perennial bunch grasses. So, you know, just dragging, once the ground's prepped, you know, and we're just, they're just sitting behind the truck, dragging something that'll cover the seeds. And this has been working, and they usually put in maybe 25-foot strips in the pasture they're seeding. And then again, then these pastures are deferred again. Next slide. Again, water developments, we're converting a lot of the old windmills or the old gas engine pumping plants to solar. So here's within the planning process, we have about 3 or 4 practices here. We have pumping plant, which is the solar panel, and the control panel. All that's in. And the submersible pump, that's all part of the pumping plant. Then we have the irrigation, the livestock pipeline. Then we have the storage, part of the livestock pipeline system, and the water facility and the pumping plant. They're all one, they all work together. Next slide. Erosion has been a big problem. That's part of these ranches when we start doing inventories. So we try to use a lot of natural material. These are just various types of rock spreaders. We use erosion control for gully erosion. This rock spreader is kind of mainly used for in the upper watersheds where you have a lot of sheet erosion just beginning. And then we've seen with the more increased storm events that our spillways and our ponds need more protection. They're really eroding after some of these huge storms that's come through here. So we're seeing a lot more areas where we need to go in there and actually arm these spillways. Next slide. And then the same practices on cropland that are basically we use irrigation water management to manage the water and to apply the water to meet the crop needs. And we also develop the irrigation system, whether it's above irrigation system like level basin with turnouts, and then then we do all of the nutrient management, the crop. Then the cover cropping and the cover cropping, and then the actually where we look at reduced tillage or just a minimum till that we're trying to introduce that. Again, this is all just to improve the soil health of these areas in our farmland. Here on the nation, we have about 8,000 acres of farmland that we're working on. And we also work with traditional farmers and using the same concepts for that. Next slide. I think that concludes the presentation.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, Gilbert. That's a lot of good information and a lot of great pictures and projects that you've been working on. I know you've been really busy out there. I was looking for questions. I have a few questions while it's coming in, if you don't mind there. I really like that you pointed out about the 50% update on that for the 90 days. So you get 50% of the cost up front, because I know that's been a barrier for quite a while, and
Yes.
it's good to see that that's been removed so some of these folks can get into actually take advantage of the program. Have you seen an uptick in people's interest in that because of that?
Actually, yes, and a lot of worry has been taken off the ranchers because, again, they know these projects are long. I mean, they're time consuming, especially with the culvert. We couldn't get pipes. You know, we couldn't get supplies or the materials for these projects. So, you know, they're glad that they don't have that time limit now.
Yeah,
and they can put them in as soon as possible.
Yeah, I know that's been an issue for a while, and the same with the irrigation history. I know that was that was a interesting discussion for a long time. But
that's fairly new. We just received those updates about a week ago.
Yeah,
so
I know
I'm
that's
trying to digest some of that and see how that will affect our growers here.
Yeah, and I know that's been brought up at SWIAA multiple times in some of our prior, so that's really good that you were able to present on that. And the last one is on the drought expectations, you know, to be like an exemption on that. I think we fairly well classify for that pretty much across the state almost on that.
Sure. Yeah, I believe so, especially with the drought monitor update.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, again, thank you, Gilbert. And we look forward to actually getting together and talking here soon.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yep. So our next presenter was scheduled to be Izetta Morris, but she ran into some family emergencies that we were in discussions with. So we're going to circle back and get in touch with her later on in the year when things settle down a little bit on that. But that's okay, because we're going to jump right in and have Alexandra Carlisle present, and she's going to present on some work she did at her graduate program. And she's in the Sandcar, or no, it's not Sandcar. She's in the Shiprock, Shiprock area, and covers a large group up there of individuals, of cattle producers and range and production areas. And I'm just going to let her take over, and it's going to talk about her capstone project. So let me get this full screen for you. Does that look good? Can't hear you.
Next slide.
Oh, there you go. Next slide.
Right there. Okay. Good morning, everybody, and it is awesome to be joining you all virtually. I wish it was in person, but with circumstances, this is the best we could do. So, but thank you for joining in today. My name is Alexandra Carlisle. I am from the Navajo Nation. I currently reside in Kirtland, New Mexico, and I work with the University of Arizona FERTEP Extension as an assistant and extension agent, and I've been here since 2017. And this is my SWIAA Indian Agriculture, our Southwest Indian Agriculture Association, my role in action. I've been a previous scholarship recipient, and they asked us to do a presentation, my role in ag. But now that I've gone through schooling and finished, I changed it to my role in action, because now it's time to put it to work. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to be talking. I'm going to be covering my capstone. Defended my capstone project for a master's program, and I just wanted to give a brief kind of walkthrough of growing up with SWIAA, because they have been a huge organization that has promoted my educational journey And I've been there, they've been there since 2010 for me. That's, wow, 11 years that they've invested in me, and that is something that I hold dear and near to my heart. Gary, and Andy, Gilbert, Trent, so many people have been a part of the organization. And but so this slide here is titled "Growing with SWIAA and the Dr. Roby Lewis Scholarship." I came to SWIAA in 2010. That was the first time I received their scholarship. And I was given the opportunity to go to Laughlin and present my role in agriculture. At the time, I was attending New Mexico State University, in which I completed my education in 2014 with a Bachelor's of Science in Animal Science and Livestock Industry.
Alexandra, you're really quiet. We can't hardly hear you, or at least I can't.
Okay, I'll try and talk louder.
Yeah, that was strange. The audio kind of slowly cut out.
Okay, where did it cut out at?
I mean, we can hear you, but the volume slowly decreased. So I'm not sure if something happened.
Okay, can you hear me now?
You're just very quiet. We can hear you, but you're just very quiet.
That's interesting because I'm talking super loud. I guess I'll just try and talk louder. So through my undergrad at NMSU, I also became a Navajo Ag Products Industry Scholar from 2010 to 2014. In each of those years of my undergraduate, I received the Roby Lewis Scholarship. So I got to see everybody every January and do my presentation and give them an update of my role in ag. I graduated in 2014 with a bachelor's degree from New Mexico State University. From there, I went to work for the Navajo Agriculture Products Industry here in Farmington, New Mexico as the alfalfa crop manager, where I managed the oversight of 17,000 acres of alfalfa production, sales, marketing, and contracts for 3 ended over there, and I found my way to the University of Arizona as the FERTEP Assistant and Extension Agent from 2017 to present. Jeannie Benally had kind of pulled me towards FERTEP, and so she was able to retire, and I came into her place. So I've been with FERTEP for about almost 4 years this coming September. And that's when I decided to take the leap and go to graduate school. And again, SWIAA was right there with me, and I applied for the scholarship as a graduate student and received the funding. So I was able to, help pay for some of the costs of going to school. And going to school full-time, working full-time is a task, but we made it work. And the awesome thing about it is my job was flexible and allowed me to do the work I love and combine what I was learning in school. And so that's what the rest of this presentation is going to be talking about. Here on the Navajo Nation, we have an issue with feral horses. And so I'll talk about how the two, I was able to merge the two of my education as well as my current position as an agent. So I received my Master's of Science in Agriculture Education, Professional Agriculture Emphasis in December 2020. But because of COVID, we weren't able to walk, which I'm pretty excited. Next month, we're actually having an in-person graduation, so that's awesome. But just some pictures to go over through here. My undergraduate photo with the one with the horse, and then my current graduate photo with me in the tree. And then the two at the bottom are just an incorporation of how I came back around and ended up working with SWIAA and helped them with a colleague of mine, the youth field days at the livestock field days that's usually held in June in Pine Top. We actually moved more towards having a youth component, which was awesome. We did some stuff on seeds, how to select seeds, identify seeds, the importance of seeds, heirloom seeding. We brought some actual hands-on activities as well. We did archery, we did a lot of different things we had a skillathon, which tested their knowledge on what they know about agriculture. So those are some of the things that I like to highlight of growing with SWIAA and over their time of my time as a student and now applying it professionally. Okay, next slide. So to complete a master's master's degree, you have to put together a project, and sometimes it's a thesis, but there's different options. And I decided to go with a capstone project. And my project encompassed looking at the critical stakeholder analysis of the socioeconomical, I'm drawing a blank right now. Socioeconomical, political, and social impacts of the feral horse issue or crisis on the Navajo Nation. And this project threw me for a whirl, because it's something that's very close to me, but also close to the people of the Navajo Nation. And we have significance of the horses in our culture. And how do you deal with a population issue that is culturally significant? And it's a very touchy subject, but I chose this project because I think it's something that we need to address. So my beginning slide, I have horses and sheep, as well as agriculture, become a function of the Navajo religion, culture, and economy. And that's a quote taken from Dr. Rudy Shabala, who had written on the significance of the horses to the Navajo and their grazing on the Navajo Nation in his doctorate dissertation. He currently sits as the Division of Natural Resources head on the Navajo Nation. So I thought that fit very well. And then at the bottom, I put a quote. I watched John Wayne movies since I was little with my paternal grandfather, who we lost a couple years ago. And its courage is being scared to death, but saddling up anyway. And I really stuck by this because change is something that is hard to embrace. It's scary, it's uncomfortable, and that's what we need to do to make change and look at some of these and have these uncomfortable conversations to make headway and better ourselves as ranchers and farmers, as land stewards, and just as a people. So that was one of the big things I like to push for this project. Next slide. So the feral horse overpopulation crisis on the Navajo Nation. Horses have always been in abundance on the Navajo Nation ever since I could remember. When I went to high school, we drove 30 minutes from Tohatchi, New Mexico to Gallup, and you could count, there was more horses than you could that commute. So moving forward, in 2016, a horse census was conducted by the Navajo Nation Department of Fish and Wildlife and revealed the following information. So they surveyed an area of 25,903.2 square miles. Basically, the Navajo Nation is what they covered. Part of the Navajo Nation anyways. Population that they found estimated 38,223 horses that were considered to be feral. And when you start talking about feral horses, wild horses, there's another, free range horses, you get into a lot of technicality, but for this presentation, I'm gonna call them feral because they, according to my research, feral is defined as an animal that was once domesticated but has subsequently escaped human captivity or been released or abandoned. And I think this is a part of a large population that are on the reservation. So within the survey of the free-ranging horses on the Navajo Nation, the report was completed the following population tally that I had just covered of 38,223 horses. And that was going on about 5 years ago. So imagine, I'm pretty sure they didn't stop breeding. So imagine what the population is now. Next slide, please. The survey of the free-ranging horses on the Navajo Nation conclusion, the survey that was conducted in 2016 by Department of Fish and Wildlife provided a population count of 38,000 horses across 23,000 miles squared. According to the Bureau of Land Management, the definition of appropriate management level, which is the number of horses reported within the Navajo Nation, exceeded the noted allowable percentage by 30%. So the amount of AML that was available for the horses and availability in that area exceeded it 30%. So we were over 30% what was allowable for the forage and water availability in just that area. And that was 5 years ago. So imagine what we're seeing with the drought, with the continuous drought that we're seeing. Next slide. So based on the 2016 tally, one of the organizations decided to issue a horse hunt proclamation in 2018, but it failed to reduce the herd numbers. But their goal was to reduce the feral horse population in the Carrizo Mountain Range only, so only one particular area in the western agency of the Navajo Nation, and they wanted to reduce it by 66 horses. So if you can look at the image there, that's the actual horse proclamation that was issued, which allows areas for hunting and dates, number of units, and the number of permits per unit. So it looks like let's see, it looks like one unit was open, which was 12, and there was 10 bag limit for that. And they were selling the permits for $10 for non-Navajo or $5 for Navajo residents. And their goal was just to bring down the population in the Carrizo Mountains. But once this had hit the newspapers and people had seen, it had been distributed, not only just the Navajo Nation, but this went nationwide. I mean, it was featured in the New York Times, and we had animal rights activists that showed up and were outside the council chambers. The president's office were getting phone calls. So it was canceled due to the lack of, it was canceled following calls from community members, the animal rights activists, and just the headway that it had gotten. And I want to say that was due to the lack of the appropriate protocols, which is a huge reason why a stakeholder analysis is important when you're working with so many different departments, different type of government. There's so many branding irons in the fire, if you will. And so that's why instead of saying, how are we going to, originally my project was, how are we going to address the problem? You know, what are the solutions? We can castrate, we can sterilize. There's these solutions, but after looking at the project and the things that I had studied, it was clear that a critical analysis of the stakeholders needed to be evaluated before we could even start talking about trying to find solutions. And this is a huge example of why there was no appropriate protocols or conversations that needed to happen between the different stakeholders within the Navajo Nation for this to occur. There's a lot of cultural sensitivity around this, and I don't think it was all considered at once. I do commend the Fish and Game Department for looking at solutions, and I don't think they did anything wrong. I think there's just more to frying this big fish than what was trying to be approached. So the counterproductive outcome demonstrates the need of a stakeholder analysis for a successful approach to the overpopulation crisis. I just took a quote out of the newspaper that following the cancellation of this, and it was from at that time President Russell Begay, who said, "My administration will not condone a horse hunt for controlling the overpopulation of feral horses." So there was just a fall through on what solutions were appropriate and which ones weren't, and the process for it to happen. Next slide, please. So now control methods that we have seen are, and these ones had been approved, and they went through the appropriate process to get these to happen. So control method roundups, the Navajo Nation Department of Agriculture presents the Equine Reward Program. Basically, they allow community members of the Navajo Nation to round up the horses, and the reward program pays the community members $500 a head, and I think it varies depending on the age of the horse, if it's an intact male or a pregnant mare or a mare and a colt, or the age. So it varies, but this is what they had started doing, and they got a lot of community member involvement in these roundups with a financial reward. So we saw some horses move off of the reservation. I don't have an exact number of how many were removed. I just didn't look that far into it, but moving forward with the project, that's something that I'd like to continue to push for and see what was successful and what wasn't successful, and deeming what successful means in some of these approaches. But because of the COVID pandemic restrictions, as well as cost and lack of community and political support and protests by animal rights activists, even with this, it was put at a halt for this year, or in 2020, and I haven't seen anything come back up for 2021. But from what I could see, I attended one in Shiprock, and they had a lot of horses that were brought in that were not marked. A lot of them were not in good health, but they were surrendered, and the people got their reward for helping out bring down the horse population. Next slide. So other control methods that have been in discussion that I've heard are birth control methods. There's both a physical method and a chemical method. Physical obviously being castration or sterilization. Chemical methods, use of fertility vaccines. Most common example is the porcine zona pellucida, or the PZP injection for the mares. Next slide. So the need for a stakeholder analysis, I touched on this a little bit earlier, but just kind of going back to the way the tribal government is situated and the interdepartment complexities that make things a little bit more difficult. I'll explain that more as we move forward. So the Navajo Nation Treaty of 1868 designated that the Navajo tribe land and ability to form their own government to operate as a sovereign nation, which means things like the BLM cannot come and step in. They can help, or we can seek assistance to that, but they can't come in and tell us how to do certain things with related to the horse population. So it really is a problem that the Navajo Nation government and departments of agriculture and fish and wildlife need to settle on our own within the tribe. So the Navajo Nation tribal government and interdepartmental complexities make this process for laws and legislation very difficult. There's a lot of steps that have to happen and a lot of departments that these particular items have to go through before getting approved. The Navajo Nation government units have various levels that play key roles in determination of laws, of action, and initiation of protocols. So like, for example, if we were going to do the horse hunt proclamation, it would probably be initiated from the Fish and Wildlife Department. Then it would have to go to the Division of Natural Resources head. From the Division of Natural Resources head, it would have to go through the different branches of government, eventually getting to the speaker and then being pushed up to the president for a yay or nay. So it's a complex process, and that's why they all have to identifying your stakeholders and the importance of where their views are and where their priorities lie is important to getting movement on some of these things, or it just completely die and just be swept under the rug because it's not of importance or it didn't follow the appropriate process. Next slide. So the goals of a completed stakeholder analysis is just to gain a better understanding of the positions of the stakeholder groups and perspectives. Before I did this project, I knew somewhat of our government and the departments and how they function, but after completing this project, I have a lot more respect for the complexities of the way our government functions and why, and I also have some questions on why things don't run as smoothly, but that's kind of my own deal. But it just gave a huge I guess it was a huge eye-opener to see the way our tribe operates and how these things can be addressed, and we can look at solutions for these types of problems. So one of the goals was identify and map the stakeholder groups, determine the influence. So looking at each group and how much influence they have on a decision like this. And then 2 is offer guidance on a roadmap that identifies potentially viable solutions to the feral horse overpopulation crisis. And that would be, sitting down with the important people from every department that is affected by this and see what we can do, or create a task force, if you will, and look at the viable feral horse population control methods moving forward. Next slide. So my key identified stakeholders for the Navajo Nation are as follows. Next slide. So the Navajo Nation government, earlier I mentioned, it's three branches: the executive, legislative, and judicial. Our voting bodies elect leadership positions. which most of the time our voting bodies are our community members. Each branch has supporting departments that function under the supervision of the executive branches. So like a tier. The Navajo Nation feral horse overpopulation crisis mostly intersects the functions of the executive and legislative branches. So you won't hear me talk too much about the judicial, but I'm going to focus mostly on the executive and the legislative branches because I think that those are the biggest stakeholders on the decision making moving forward. Next slide. So identified key stakeholders, 3 groups that I had just broadly named out was the Navajo Nation government units, executive and legislative branch, Navajo Nation branch subdepartments. So this is of the executive branch and the legislative branch. So of the executive, of course, we got the president, vice president, division of natural resources. Within the division of natural resources, we have the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Department of environmental protection. Within the legislative branch, we have the Speaker, the Navajo Nation Council, which is comprised of 24 elect council delegates. And then the delegates, we also have chapter house officials. So of the 110 chapters that we have throughout the Navajo Nation, we have officials from those chapters as well. So there's, if you can see, there's a lot of working bodies, there's a lot of people involved. And so by not correctly identifying who has the impact and the influence and where you can work, it makes things a little difficult to make a big decision like this. And lastly is your community members. I think your community members are your most influential group. Why? Because these are your farmers, these are your ranchers, your hunters, your traditional Navajo healers. These are the people that actually use the land, that have livestock out there, that farm the land, that utilize the water, the natural resources that are available. And of course, you got your animal care professionals, your veterinarians, your vet technicians, people that are looking out for the better interest of the livestock and the animals. So next slide. With that being said, the executive branch oversight and support falls in the executive branch. The overall responsibility to review and veto proposed legislation and laws, oversight of the Navajo Division of Natural Resources. So they're kind of at the top of the tier, and then you'll see it trickle down, and that's where you got your worker ants, and then you got your head who kind of looks at everything and decides yes or no on some of the legislation or laws that need to happen, which is why the president was able to completely just call off the hunt because he said he didn't support it. So within that, the Division of Natural Resources has a department head, and their responsibility is specific on management of natural resources and environment across the Navajo Nation, which is the oversight of the Department of Agriculture and Fish and Wildlife, as well as Navajo Nation EPA, but I didn't put that on there because I wanted to focus more on the Department of Agriculture and Department of Fish and Wildlife because they were the most involved in the census. So within the Department of Agriculture, of course, they've got their own boots on the ground is what I like to call them. They're the people that are out there digging in the dirt and chasing the cattle, rounding up horses. So the Department of Agriculture, extension agents, grazing officials, and farm board all function together. And they were the ones that were significantly behind the operation of the horse roundups. They were doing roundups on their own, as well as taking care of the buyback reward program we talked about earlier. And so, and across the Navajo Nation, we have different agencies. We've got a northern agency, that's where I work. We've got a central agency. We've got a Fort Defiance agency, eastern agency, and then we also have got the western agency. And so each of those agencies have extension agents within the Department of Agriculture for the Navajo Nation. And then, of course, each chapter of the 110 chapters across the Navajo Nation have grazing officials, and they also have a farm board. So all those function together. So that's a lot of people if you really start thinking about it and putting numbers together. Department of Fish and Wildlife, they're the ones that have your biologists, your conservation officers, and your zoologists also looking at the effects of feral horses, grazing livestock on wildlife. If you increase the number of feral horses, you're encroaching on wildlife grazing areas, those things are affected when we start looking at population density. Okay, next slide. Active workforce. These are the guys that I just mentioned are the boots on the ground, the active presence throughout the Navajo Nation. I did cover the 5 major agencies of the Navajo Nation, and they're the ones that push for the horse Roundup legislation, which got approved by pictures before in this presentation where they are actually functioning and having an operating equine reward program. So they went through the process to make it happen. Department of Fish and Wildlife, these guys are your experts in wildlife habitat, and they're the ones that initiated the population tally in 2016 and made the attempt for the 2018 horse hunt. So these are the guys that are kind of making things happen and try to get the ball rolling. But of course, they need the support from all the other stakeholders that are there as well. And next slide. The legislative branch, this is your other part of the government unit stakeholders. Office of the Speakers, the oversight of the Navajo Nation Council, and provides communication between the council and the president. The Navajo Nation Council does have elected officials from the 110 designated Navajo Nation communities, but there are 24 within council community representatives. So of the 110 chapters, 24 individuals represent those areas. And they all have an opinion and they all have a vote on these legislations or laws or solutions to some of the things that come across the Navajo Nation. Next slide. Community members. Earlier I had mentioned, I think this is the largest stakeholder, the most influential and voting body, but for previously discussed elected officials. So if the community members don't stand behind your elected officials and what they're trying to propose, like any type of political influence, you get votes or you lose votes based on what you're trying to propose. So your community members are a huge influencer for your leadership that you're going to have. From here, we have varied influencing factors that either provide Navajo Nation leadership with support or oppose legislation or plan of action. These are broken into categories, again, of community members that have been identified as your ranchers, your farmers, your hunters, animal care experts, and your traditional healers, as well as other voting members on the Navajo Nation. But these were the ones I had identified were the most impacted by the feral horse population on the Navajo Nation. Next slide. So traditional healers and the significance of the Shlink to the Navajo people. So horses are a pinnacle part of the Navajo Nation creation story and holds great cultural significance. So how do we propose that we're just going to hunt and shoot them, right? Without looking at the cultural sensitivity portion of this, it makes these decisions a little bit more difficult and complex, alongside of the complexity of working with interdepartmental staff and elected officials from throughout the whole Navajo Nation. The horse embodies the beauty, strength, protection, and balance important to the Navajo people to live and thrive in harmony with nature. Horses have their own ceremonies and songs and prayers. Young colts are harvested and consumed for medicinal reasons only. And there are very few that still practice the young colts being harvested and consumed for medicinal reasons, and that is usually done in the winter time, and it's to prevent ailment. It brings us health and prevents us from getting sick. And so, you know, just kind of flying back when COVID-19 hit, there was some traditional healers that were saying maybe that's something we need to go back to. Let's look for some of these young colts and see if we can harvest them, do ceremonies, and maybe we can protect ourselves from this, what was it? That's what they were calling COVID-19. And the Navajo Nation got hit really hard. And so looking back at some of these traditional significance and healing, maybe that's something that as people we need to go back and fix. And that's another call for looking at situations and problems like this and looking for solutions so that as a people we can continue to thrive and live in harmony with nature, because something is obviously out of balance. And they also believe that the mistreatment or disruption of horses' natural existence have adverse consequences to Navajo people. that can result in affecting crop yields, unsuccessful hunting, unhealthy livestock, lack of rainfall, and the well-being of the Navajo people. You know, this is just the way we're looking at things. So if you're doing roundups or castrating or utilizing fertility drugs, that could be seen as culturally as a way of disrupting the natural existence of horses. And so as a Navajo, an educated Navajo woman who's looking at the importance of being a land steward, the importance of the existence of our natural resources, and the existence and significance of our culture. How do you look and begin to think of ways to address a problem or a crisis that we're seeing with the feral horse population? It's a very sticky and tricky situation, and it's a really fine line of trying to look at and identify how we're going to address that issue. It's easy to go and say, well, we'll just shoot them all, but that's not the way to go about it. And that's why I think this has been an issue that has been ongoing, and we really haven't seen much of a solution been developed. Next slide. Back one more. There you go. Okay. So I took this from Gerald Moore, who had recently retired before 2020. And I really liked his outlook on this, because this picture just sums up everything on the importance and the essence of the horse, not only in education and philosophy and the way we exist, being one with nature as a people. The horse come from the elements of earth, water, air, and sun, or light. The horse is of the 4 sacred mountains. Again, they represent the east, west, south, and north. And with that, they represent the 4 stones that we find sacred, is the white shell, the yellow shell, turquoise, and the black jet shell. Representation of the 4 seasons that we have: spring, fall, summer, winter. They represent the white corn, the evening, vegetation, and night. And each of those signify the parts of the way we as people function, because we work big with 4-H, and 4-H emphasizes head, health, hands, and heart. But also with our culture, you know, head, clear thinking and planning, looking ahead; our hands, organizing and working; health, living in balance with nature; and our heart, self-esteem, how we think about ourselves and how we exist as a people. And so I think this slide here just really ties it all together, and the importance of both managing the life of the horses, managing our land, and also managing us as a people. And so these are some of the things that, you know, we took into consideration when I was identifying your stakeholders. And this is a huge part of why I think the community members is the largest, most influential side of the stakeholders of the analysis. Next slide, please. And other, as well as our continual concerns through drought. If you look at this drought density monitor on the right-hand side of the computer, 2014, we were sitting in a D2, D3 within our area. And then you look at the image on the right-hand side, 2020, the drought intensity monitor, we're in a D3, D4. We haven't even shifted to get any of the moisture that we should be getting. And when you're looking at a drought, you're getting less than 50% of the amount of average rainfall that you should be getting. And we've been, from 2020 to 2004, that's 16 years. And I'm pretty sure it's even been longer than that. But, you know, these are things that we need to start considering. We've got to manage. In order for us to properly manage the land, we need to manage our animals. That includes our feral populations, wildlife populations, as well as our domestic populations. I see a lot of people buying supplemental hay from, I see hay getting hauled from Farmington back onto the reservation. And I think if we're having to supplement feed that much, maybe we need to actually consider reducing our herd numbers. Next slide. Common concerns from the community members. Again, this is just highlighting everything that falls and why this group is so influential as a stakeholder. Is the drought, reduction in plant species diversity. These are concerns that community members have brought up. Overgrazing, lack of water availability. A lot of people, dry water tanks are empty. Crop yield reduction, taking water from the river or diverting water is affecting irrigation areas. Disruption of grazing patterns of wildlife, like I had mentioned, in the Carrizo mountain area, it was affecting the wildlife population, so that's why they initiated the horse hunt, or tried to. Concerns with domesticated livestock ownership and sheep units year long. Earlier I just mentioned maybe we need to reduce our domestic livestock herds. A lot of the time we're over our allotted numbers, because on the Navajo Nation you have a grazing permit, which allows you a certain number of sheep units year long to have grazing on your area. And these grazing permits allow you access to the forage, not the land. You don't own the land. You have the rights to forage for their livestock to graze on. So if we're running out of forage, then obviously the sheep units year long should be decreased on the availability of number of head per area. Wildlife displacement. We're seeing deer in areas we haven't seen them before. We're seeing elk being shifted out, even starting to affect your predatory animals because they're following the deer. They're following whatnot. When I used to work at Nappy, which is about, I want to say 30 to 40 miles from the nearest mountain range, there was deer out there, big bucks, because they're moving and they know that there's a farm there. So we're seeing wildlife displacement. Aggressive feral horse behavior. If you're out there and you've got some of your own horses, some people are seeing aggressive feral horses, particularly intact males are trying to get to their mares. Destructive behavior, plowing through barns, trying to get into feed sources, water sources that are gated, because there's no accessibility for them out on the range. Motor accidents involving horses. You can drive down any road on the reservation and almost see issues with not only horses but cattle that are being hit by vehicles. You know, that affects people that are just trying to go from point A to point B. Humane and overall well-being of the horses. I had mentioned I attended one of the horse buyback programs, and some of those horses were in pretty bad shape, and some of them are in really good shape. It just depends on the horse. But, you know, the overall well-being, doing something versus not doing something could really, there's a fine line between humane and non-humane treatment. Do we continue to let them be out on the range and starve and be malnutrition, inbreeding, or do we step in and try to manage that as well? And then the biggest influencer is your cultural significance of the horse to the Navajo people. Disrupting natural state. Roundups, any type of mistreatment that may or may not occur can be a taboo to the Navajo way of life. Next slide, please. And here are some of the adverse consequences that we're seeing. Supplemental feed being purchased, having to haul water, decreased carrying capacity, lack of forage on the ground, death of livestock, dried water tanks, having to erect fencing and other boundaries just to keep livestock in or out of areas, displacement of wildlife, death or great bodily harm due to accidents of horses and vehicle collisions, destruction of riparian areas, harder to hunt or harvest wildlife essential to cultural ceremonies. Even wildlife have their role in our ceremonies and whatnot, but with displacement, sometimes it's harder for people to find what they're needing when they go hunting because they've been displaced. Increase invasive species. Oh, I have a story for you on that. A couple years ago in Shiprock, we saw a huge increase in the purple larkspur, and because there's no other native plant species that exist in that area, so we saw invasive plants begin to increase in population. And there are some producers that I had talked with that have lost anywhere from 10 to 30 head of livestock. Destruction of equipment, you know, you run into issues where they're getting into your pens, destroying things. Herd reduction of permittees, the people that are responsible, livestock owners are having to reduce their herds because we can't manage the larger issue. Poor body condition of horses, inhumane treatment of horses, and difficult to pose a solution to population control due to the cultural significance and fear of a consequential taboo is what we're facing. Next slide. And this photo is one that I just say is a huge summary for some type of solution. This was taken in the Western Agency, and we saw over 100 horses reported dead. And their carcasses are there, and if in the picture, it's not the clearest picture, but they're trying to get to water, and they got stuck in the mud, and they died. That picture sums up a lot of the adverse consequences that we're seeing. Drought, dried up water tanks, inhumane treatment. They have no accessibility to water. And look at what we're facing. Next slide. So with the completed stakeholder analysis, I identified and articulated the stakeholder groups now provide a better understanding of each position and views. Now I can see where everybody plays a part and who have the most influence and where we can go to start working towards finding a solution. This provides a roadmap to the essential stakeholders who are crucial to developing an effective solution, and provides guidance to move forward in assembling what hopefully we can call a feral horse task force to begin implementing a holistic, mutually beneficial plan to manage the feral horse population on the Navajo Nation. Next slide. So with that, my next steps is what I want to carry outside of my project and see if I can work with the Navajo Nation on identifying a solution. Next slide. So with this, I would try the social cultural perspective of the feral horse population, a sensitive but essential element to advancing an effective strategy for addressing the crisis. As a student of the Department of Agriculture, Education, Technology, and Innovation, this topic is one that is uncomfortable for me to discuss, but is crucial within my tribe. Next slide. So here's where I would like to try and continue to take this project outside of just my graduate school for me to get my degree, but also apply it to my, this is where my action comes in, is to establish contact with each key stakeholder group, request interviews, and administer evaluation and see what their point is. Try to collect and analyze questionnaire and interview data. Share findings with the different keyholder representatives, and try to assemble some type of feral horse task force that has people from each area so that we get a holistic viewpoint and we get equal input from these areas. So we're not leaving anybody out, but we're trying to include them, but we're also looking at a viable, mutually beneficial solution. Does that mean we're only gonna sell the horses? No. Does that mean we're gonna shoot all the horses? No. Does that mean we're gonna throw out all the stuff that we think is culturally significant of the horse? No. Mutually beneficial and holistic means we're going to look at all sides, and that's why it's important for the stakeholders from each group to be identified and then brought forth and see if we can work together to find a solution. Begin by having the uncomfortable conversation with Navajo tribal members to influence change and foresight of the future of the Navajo Nation, Navajo people's significance, and the well-being of the fleet as well as our Denepikeya, because if we don't start taking care of it, eventually it's all going to be gone. Next slide. And then this was just kind of a timeline of what I was going to work through on those different projects, but next slide. So the important measures for developing a plan was looking at environmental impacts, identify the appropriate management level and operating budget, feasible management goals to decrease current population, and enact long-term management principles. So this is the important things with that. If I can develop a task force group, these are the things that would be of major focus. Next slide. And in harmony and balance we can thrive. And that concludes my presentation. It's great pleasure and consideration of the Diné people, the cultural significance and well-being of the Tli, which is a Navajo term for horses, and Diné Bekeya, which is a Navajo term for the Navajo Nation, that I present my capstone pilot project as well as this presentation to you within attending our SWIAA virtual webinar today. I hope you enjoyed it. I think we're taking questions. I'm not sure on time. I tend to be long-winded, but I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Trent, for any questions or however you would like to do that.
Oh, yeah, we did have one question in there. Their question was, do you happen to know why Navajo Nation and the Fish and Wildlife Department initiated the horse tally rather than the Navajo Department of Ag?
I wouldn't know. I think my take would probably be because of the Fish and Wildlife saw more of it affecting the wildlife population in the Carrizo Mountains and Western Agency. That's why they initiated the tally count prior to the Department of Ag.
Yeah. And I know this question I have real quick, and then we can move on to Ed, is I know you have started looking at getting some folks together, even from like NTU and Navajo Technical University and Diné College and some other groups up there. How far along are you on that?
Yeah, that's working with Dr. John from the University of Arizona, who she sat on my committee panel when I presented, and we're working with NTU, CSU, and U of A currently. So far, we've put in a grant, and we're just kind of waiting to see where we go with that. But a lot of it comes with education. She's coming at it from using the horse as an educational resource and the philosophy of thinking, and the anthropology side of it. That's where she's coming from. And me and Christy and Gray are coming from not only the culture side, but the stewardship side and the animal science side of it. And so we've put in a grant to do work on educational seminars, tying the gap on these different things and that relate to the horses and to the population and their use in education as well. We've submitted the grant through the National Science Foundation, and we haven't heard yet back.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much for presenting, and going to move on. And our next speaker is going to be Dr. Franklin, who's going to talk about drones and use of drones in the agricultural field.